Hello and welcome to another episode of The Rest is Plastics, and this is a very special edition as we're kicking off 2026 with the Special Wounds edition. It's exciting to see breakthroughs in wound healing to confront real-world clinical challenges, and these articles are all written with the clinician in mind. And today we've got 4 guests.
So we have first Professor Jason Wong, who's a clinical academic. He's a plastic surgeon in Manchester, but also a deputy editor at JPRAS. We've got Charlotte Coates, who's Deputy Chief Executive of the Scarfree Foundation. Professor Geoffrey Gurtner, who's a plastic surgeon and Professor of Bioengineering at the University of Arizona College of Medicine. And Professor Paul Martin, who's a basic scientist at the University of Bristol and who's been working in the field of wound healing for many years.
Jason, you edited the special edition. Tell us what all this is about. What was the inspiration and why is this important to JPRAS?
Yeah, well, Phil, thank you very much for the invitation to your podcast. I've been an avid listener, and you guys have done a fantastic job in elevating the JPRAS brand. So on behalf of the editors, we're really proud of what you're doing. And the idea surrounding a wound special issue has been brewing for some years, actually. And we've never really found the best opportunity to do so until recently. And when we heard that Scarfree were celebrating their 25-year anniversary, we thought it'd be a great opportunity then to collaborate with them. And back in 2024, October time, they had this fantastic conference that brought together some really inspiring basic scientists, translational scientists and clinicians to talk about all aspects of wound healing and scarring. So luckily I was invited to that conference and to the opportunity to start reaching out to the various speakers who were at that conference, and then asked permission from Charlotte to see if we could bring that together to really be a celebration of the work that had been supported by the Scarfree over the years. And of course, Geoff and Paul were the particular highlights to that meeting, and pulling in and having an excuse to speak to them and pull them into the special edition was really something that we thought was a fantastic opportunity to do. And it's a real kind of turning point for us at JPRAS. As you know, we've had a revision of the editorial board. We've got new people onto the board quite recently with new ideas and innovative ways to move forward. And the JPRAS special issues are really something that we want to highlight and take forward with a number of special issues planned for the rest of 2026. So that's why it's important to JPRAS, and it's just been a privilege to work on this special issue.
Great. Well, thank you, Jason. That's very comprehensive, and thank you for your kind words. Charlotte, you're here representing the Scarfree Foundation, and you're Deputy Chief Executive. Could you tell us a little bit about the Scarfree charity, what it supports, and why this particular issue means, what it means to the Scarfree Foundation?
Yes, I'd like to thank JPRAS for this Wounds Special Edition, which I think is a really brilliant compendium that showcases the breadth of research in wound healing and scarring science. So firstly, thank you. We're most grateful. So the Scarfree Foundation, we are a UK medical research charity. We were founded by BAPRAS back in 1998. And since then, we've made possible around £50 million of research into wound healing and scarring. Our research strategy, it basically focuses on identifying the biological pathways which lead to scarring, changing those pathways to prevent or improve scarring, and supporting people living with scars, so the visual, functional and psychological impact of scarring. Over the course of our 25 years, we have funded a broad range of programs, projects, centres in the UK, focused on everything from kind of discovery science, regenerative medicine, through to cleft lip and palate, burns and psychology. We're a small operation. There are currently 7 of us, and we're based around the UK. And although we might not be able to be a big hitter financially, because it's very difficult for a little charity to raise money, though I think we have been fairly successful, I think one thing that's really important to us is the fact that I think we've created a community of interest around wound healing and scarring research. And we've tried to bring together kind of diverse professions and turned some researchers into wound healing researchers who weren't necessarily in that field already, and tried to kind of build and nurture this community of interest, and particularly by doing things like the symposium that we did last year, by doing workshops, etc. And I think it's really nice, because I've been at the foundation for a while, that people have met through doing foundation type stuff, have then gone on to do successful kind of research collaborations. And I suppose being a tiny little convener, trying to punch above our weight, is essentially what we do.
Fantastic. Professor Gurtner, let's come to you. You're Professor of Surgery and Biomedical Engineering at the University of Arizona College of Medicine, and previously at Stanford School of Medicine in the US. It's great to have you on the show. You've made some amazing discoveries in wound healing and scars over the years. As plastic surgeons, many of us have vague ideas of mechanobiology. We learn about phenomena like creep during tissue expansion, and of course, tension in wounds and things like that. But your work approaches this slightly differently. You spent decades researching wound biomechanics. Tell us why it's so fundamental to better scarring, and perhaps highlight your journey translating this research to patients.
I became first interested in biomechanics and scarring when I was working as an intern at the Boston Shriners Hospital. I had a supervisor, Professor Matt Donlan, who was a Harvard Medical School professor, and we operated a lot at the Shriners Burn Hospital doing burn reconstruction. And he made a comment, and I was an intern, so I was very open to learning that the scars seem to always form where there's mechanical tension, around the mouth, around the eyes, flexion, contraction, and things like that. And I found that very interesting because, it didn't make sense to me why that would occur. And so I kind of followed that away and finished my training. And then when I began my lab, there was a lot of interest in fetal wound healing and kind of why do fetuses heal without scars. And there was a lot of phenomenology of the different growth factors and different differences in the environment. And so we kind of looked at fetuses, and turns out they're mechanically very different, obviously, than adult humans. They are almost gelatinous at the point where they have, norm or have scarless healing. And so we started to ask the question of why are all these growth factors and things different, and could mechanics be part of it? And so we did a simple experiment on mice where we just changed the mechanical environment in the same mouse, and found that they healed about 800% more scarring. And so you really get about 10-fold increase in scarring if you increase the mechanical environment. And interestingly, that paper was almost impossible to get published because at the time everyone was, it's TGF-beta, it's this, it's that isoform, this is stupid. And so it took us like 3 years to get that published. And then once it got published, we just kept working in that area, because it turns out when you look at that from, a genetic perspective or transcriptomic perspective, we were hoping that there'd be one thing that's different, and then we target it and you get scarless healing. Turns out there's like 1,000 things that are different. And so it became, not possible to kind of target 1,000 things at once. So we, started looking for bottlenecks and transcription factors. And so that work has continued. We found, certain intermediaries in the mechanotransduction pathways that seem to be very fertile areas where if you block them, you get much, much less scarring, and in some cases, true regeneration. And on the flip side, we've been looking at why do mammals have this mechanism, and what are the cells that are important in mechanotransduction? And fibroblasts are the workhorses for sure, but recently we've found that there's a subset of the innate immune system that's mechanoresponsive, and actually seems to be there very, very early in wound healing, and kind of orchestrates what happens with the fibroblasts, and that might actually be important in cancer. So it's kind of just started from the observation of Dr. Donlan, and then we've kind of gone off in different directions. One of the directions was to early on we're like, okay, a lot of things happen in mice that don't happen in humans, so let's make sure this biology works in humans. And we developed a little medical device mainly as an investigational tool, and we put it on people and found that their scars went down about 80%. And so then we're like, hey, maybe, and people wanted it. So we're like, okay, we're selling it. So we sell it over the internet, via e-commerce, I guess is the sophisticated way to say it. And, it basically breaks even. It's not, making tons of money, but we're able to cover our costs, and people, now about 500,000 people have used it. And if you look at the social networks that assess scar products, like realself.com. It has a high approval rating. So, people who are paying cash money seem to think it's worth it. And so, we feel like, this is a really fundamental part of biology that has been somewhat overlooked by kind of pure basic science, which, I think comes out of, the observations that we make in the operating room, which, again, I think surgeon scientists were kind of like naturalists. We kind of go walk on the beach, look at sparrows and finches, and, that's kind of what we do when we operate on people. It's kind of looking at what actually happens and on a one-by-one, off basis. And occasionally, we come up with insights that I think are worth looking at in the lab, and this hopefully is one of them where that seems to, be promising.
If I may jump in, Anton, because I was hoping to ask Geoff this question. Geoff, you came to Oxford where I was a trainee about 10 years ago. I remember coming to the seminar and was very inspired because you were able to balance a kind of clinical career with a very research-heavy one. Can you just give us an idea how one can balance that? I mean, it will be very difficult throughout the entire training period and beyond. And now you're talking about, commercializing things too. That's another whole topic. How does one go about a career like that?
I think you have to be very strategic and kind of find niche areas. The nice thing in plastic surgery is there's lots of nichey little areas and corners that you can become an expert in. Like I'm the expert in scars and burn reconstruction in Arizona, which, is, there's enough in Arizona to keep my dance card in the OR full. And, but it's very elective. And so, I think it's hard to, I think all of us as trainees, we want to be, the master surgeon who does everything and everyone always wants to reach out to. And I think that is challenging to kind of marry with, a research career. So I think you have to kind of, figure out strategically, like, what is it the most important thing for you in your life? For me, it was really innovation but I love being a surgeon. So I had to find a clinical area that it was very elective. And so it's been strategic. So even now as I'm chair of surgery here, and I still do 1 half day of clinic and 1 full day of OR every week. And to be honest, that's my favorite time of the week. The rest of the stuff is hard and, dealing with people and managing people. So it's really, people are like, why are you still doing this? I'm like, because it's fun. I like it. It's, I like to help people and, I think I'm okay at it. And so, but I think you have to be very, very strategic in terms of how you build your practice. And fortunately, I think actually plastic surgery is well suited to it. You can become a vascular anomalies expert. And again, that's something that was one of the options as I was a young trainee was, maybe I should go into this because that's equally kind of, I can make it elective and compartmentalizable. So that's a long-winded answer, but that's kind of how I've done it.
I think people often, when they start out, they want, as you say, want to be good at everything, but actually to become known as an expert in one thing, no matter what that is, can actually be way more powerful.
It's you just have to kind of have the ego strength that you kind of aren't the master surgeon who everyone comes to at all times, which is very gratifying. I mean, many of my faculty are, phenomenal. They're in the OR all the time. They're helping people out, doing amazing things. And that does look fun. It's just like, if you do that, you probably can't do, research in a serious way. And you probably, it's going to be harder to do kind of startups and stuff like that. So I think it's, good to be realistic and then just prioritize, what's the most important thing to you? For me, it was always like, I want to innovate. I want to come up with new ways to deal with problem X, Y, and Z and advance it into patients. That was what I always loved. And so that I had to kind of move everything around to make that work. But other people are different. And so that's the nice thing.
Let's move on to Professor Paul Martin, because he's a master scientist. He's, I think, the first basic scientist we've had on the Director's Plastic show. So welcome. This is wild. So for our listeners, you're a cell biologist based at the University of Bristol, where you run a big research group on many different aspects of wound healing. And you have a number of articles in this issue. 3, I think. So the first one was with your niece, Dr. Holly Fletcher, who's a historian at UCL. And you talked about the wound man. So tell us, what is this wound man? Who is he? And what is this fascinating part of wound history?
I always fancied collaborating with Holly. She's a 16th century journalist, young, a PI, and it's completely different world to mine. But the wound man's been around since the 14th century. The wound man that we picked on was Anton 1514, that's 16th century. Her area of German history was there. But it was by any means the first of the wound men. Wound men are illustrations for the equivalents in you lot over in 3 year sentences and illustrate what the wound is that you might have to deal with. And the typical wound man has arrow, cannonball, surgeries, broken legs, everything. He's very stoical. He stands there as though in no pain, and essentially serves for the test. Says, if your patient has a cannonball in the leg, then you need to debride it. You probably need to anesthetize the patient. If the leg's broken, then you might need to splint it. So all of the technical, I couldn't read because it's in, ancient German, but Holly can translate it. And what we did in this paper was look at what Hans von Gersel suggested and discuss what new current surgeons might do and what basic science researchers thinks is relevant. And it turned out that quite a lot of what he did, you guys still do. I mean, you still use opiates, you still have to split bones, you still have to debride. It was a fun exercise, really. And I think since the wound man is so iconic, and many of you will have come across images of him, I mean, he features in that he's the latest Batman DC Comics enemy. He's the bad guy, wound man, and last year in Batman Astro that took warrior against. He has all these weapons sticking in him. He loves pain and he likes inflicting pains. And the wound man, the historical wound man, would be inspiration for that. So, timely. And you put it on the front cover, which I'm very chuffed about, Jason Frank.
That's great. You also wrote a fascinating piece with one of our idols, Professor Gus McGrowther. He's a very distinguished academic surgeon. He spent many years in Manchester and most recently Singapore. Can you tell us about that paper as well?
Yeah, so before he moved to Manchester, he was based in UCL. And he and I started up, him as a sort of senior professor and head of plastic surgery, and we as a junior lecturer at UCL in the same year, and neither of our labs had been refurbished, so we shared an office. I mean, and it was fantastic for me as a basic scientist interested in wounded and dead fish with Gus. And then about 15 years ago, I was involved in a Gordon Research Conference, which is largely made by basic scientists working in wounded. And I invited him along, or suggested he was invited along, so that he and I could do what I think Geoff and I think is important, is basic science and clinical science to interact and to talk to each other. So he described to this audience of mostly basic scientists what are the real clinical problems. And we need to be told what those real clinical problems are. We shouldn't just be asking questions that we think are interesting. And I attempted to address what we as basic scientists thoroughly knew about these critical scenarios. And Jason, who's a buddy of Gus's, suggested we revisit that. And we revisited it in a Chinese restaurant in Manchester a year or so. Was it a year ago, Jason? Jason paid, which I didn't think plastic surgeons ever bought meals for basic scientists. But anyway, he was generous. And the outcome is this was review. I mean, I would say the punchline of that article is, please, basic scientists and clinicians talk more to each other. The basic scientists in my juniors, I often, if there's any chance, get them to chat with or even go to a clinic and watch the clinician so they can see what a real human chronic wound looks like. And it's very different from a Drosophila fruit fly embryos, little laser wound with a new self-migrating injury. And similarly, I think folks like Geoff, he embraced this I'm a clinician for all do theory of science. We just really overall that, I think. And mustn't see this, basic scientists working on what they think is important to wound healing, and clinicians, deciding that, line of lines are important and that sort of. You can go crazy reading to publish 3 papers.
I wonder whether we can bring in Geoff here because, Geoff, how do you foster that relationship between your basic scientists and your clinician colleagues?
I think it's much easier dealing with the basic scientists because in general, the basic science community is very, very collaborative and very interested. Even basic scientists are very interested in translation. So I think the basic scientists, like reaching out to them and asking to work with them is, I think, very trivial for clinicians. I think sometimes the clinicians, obviously the tyranny of the urgent, we're all very busy, sometimes don't follow through as much as maybe would be ideal, or don't underestimate how hard basic science is. I actually think from a pure effort perspective, getting a paper in a high impact journal is one of the hardest things that I do, because it's, years and years, and you have to come up with like all these rebuttals to criticisms, and then it's very gratifying because people notice it and it becomes something that moves the field forward. But boy, is it hard. And I think sometimes the clinicians kind of think they'll spend like 6 months in the lab and publish a Nature paper, and you're just like, it's not really how it works. And if you want to publish a Nature paper, let's go for it. But you got to probably commit 3 years to the lab. And so there's sometimes, I think, an underestimation of just basic science, and actually getting to truth is really hard. And so I think maybe a little bit more humility and kind of understanding on the part of clinicians about, you got to be in. It's just like taking care of a patient. It's just like doing a free flap. You can't half-ass it. You got to like really, really, really commit. And if you're not willing to commit, then yes, we can still work with you. You're going to give us specimens. We're going to include you on the papers, but it's going to be less intellectually interesting probably for you than it would be otherwise. I think it's great. Doing both is amazing because again, when you're in the OR, you're seeing like things. You're like, why does that happen? Why is this not working or whatever? And then you can go to the lab and try to ask those. There's obviously too many questions that you could ever answer in one human lifetime, but it is a great place to kind of brainstorm and come up with ideas that then you can kind of look at in the basic science lab. So although it is a hard road to take because you have to do full clinical training and you obviously need to still be a good clinician, in my opinion, to do it, ethically, to operate on people. So that requires some time commitment. Then you have to do the full research pull, which is a thing and you have to go through getting grants and all that. But, if you can achieve it, I think it's the best job in the world. So I think it's worthwhile. It's like the ultimate in delayed gratification. We talk about delayed gratification for surgery, but delayed gratification for a surgeon scientist comes in like your mid 40s and 50s, unfortunately.
And Jason, you're somebody who straddles both spheres as well. Any input from you?
Well, it is an incredibly rewarding job, but it's incredibly hard work. And I think there's many times in your career where you think, well, perhaps the easy way out is to do full-time clinical and forget about the research. But it's something that working with the basic scientists and learning from them new techniques, new approaches, new breakthroughs, really just keeps you stimulated all the time. And so it's really nice to have that balance. And the main thing is it's fun. I think that Geoff highlighted there that if you feel like you're getting a lot out of it, it's worthwhile doing.
But as Paul's shown in his article, is the wound sphere is so fertile for research and the collaboration between basic scientists and clinicians. So, which is why this whole collaboration with the Scarfree charity is so key, I think. So maybe, Paul, we can carry on and go on to your third article, if you don't mind, which captures the current work in your lab. You tell us about an unusual approach that you take to the problem of scarring, combining population genetics and animal models, which they both seem to be sitting at opposite ends of the spectrum of biological investigation. So do you tell us what led you to this, to use this approach, and why might this be the most efficient way to discover therapeutics to improve wound healing?
I don't know whether I would argue it's the most effective, but it's certainly a complement to the ways that the wounded community have tried to find in both here so far. I mean, what's very clear is that there's variability across human populations in loads of things, eye colour and, predisposition to getting cancer. And it turns out there's also variability in how you scar. And if you chat to various people, you often come across folk who say, well, I only need to cut myself and I end up with a dirty drooping labrum, almost a keloid. And it's other folk who are saying they just don't scar. And that variability you can capture in population health cohorts. But they're not trivial to find. These population health cohorts are not very easy to find. In Bristol, we have a cohort called MUSPAC, the children of the 90s, 14,000 mums and their babies. And so we thought we would be able to interrogate that. But it isn't the case that every one of those 14,000 mums had an identical wound, which you need 14,000 people with something very similar and properly quantifying variability. And the thing we came up with initially was VCD scars, on the arm. And certainly those, if you're just looking in the changing room, be careful if you do it in the changing room because people will worry about you. But you'll see that some people have a tiny BCG scar and others have a huge one. And so we set about measuring that and looking to see whether any SNPs indicating a gene might be associated with either large or minuscule BCG scars. To hint at whether that woman is a heavy-duty scarer or, somebody doesn't scar with it. And we have found several interesting targets, including key protein coupled receptors that are very druggable. Now, I'm only a basic scientist, so it's not the sort of thing I would do to take the clinic, but that's the sort of novel finding that you can make using population health studies. When I go to wound healing meeting and I say, we've been using as a proxy wound a BCG scar, people laugh at me. And so we take on board a new Brazilian cohort we just started doing business with in Pelotas in Brazil, where it's a women's health cohort, and an awful lot of women in Brazil and in this Pelotas cohort have cesarean sections. It's of course similar in size and shape and age of patient when this is done, and we've been measuring those and started to find some swift gene seem to be associated with heavy duty scarring, very light scarring. So I would say it's not the most efficient necessarily, but it's an alternative way to start to hunt down scarring genes. Because once you've got scarring genes, as Geoff said, you can start thinking about, potential therapeutics. Not someone like me, but clinicians, pharma can start to think about how one might take that to the clinic.
Some elegant solutions there, and certainly, some out-of-the-box thinking to find those two populations. So it's evident from our conversation that having surgeons collaborating with basic scientists supported by a plastic surgery charity is really vital for progressing our specialty. So we'll wrap things up with a comment from each of you, if we may. Perhaps we'll start with Miss Coates. But what top pearls can you give the audience to progress towards better wound healing and a scar-free future?
Well, this may sound very, very base, but one thing that will really help is funding. Is large-scale funding to do the kind of big, multi-year, multidisciplinary program grants where there's interplay between basic scientists and people developing therapies and clinicians. And that's something we've done little bits and bobs of, but that's something we want to do a lot more of. And I think one thing that will move us much closer to scar-free healing is being able to really significantly invest in developing a pipeline for scar-associated genes into the clinic and continuing that, nurturing that. And also, doing really good work looking at things like understanding more about tension, understanding more about the wound environment, lots of things that could, if we've catalyzed all these people variously around the country, but actually being able to ground all the talented people in a good program. And that will do so much, rather than little bits, rather than people doing things in their spare time, all of that, but to actually treat it seriously and to be able to convey to the public, to funders, to the research councils that scarring is common but very poorly understood. But we have the tools at our fingertips to be able to make some really significant change, I think.
Fantastic. Prof. Martin, how about yourself?
Well, I was listening to Jason and Geoff. I think it's urgent and essential that they keep at it as role models, because I imagine young clinicians thinking about whether they should try persist with a career in basic science, will rely on being motivated by you guys. I think clinicians in basic sciences have to talk more together. It mustn't be that there are clinician-only conferences and basic science-only conferences, so we need to sort that out a little bit. I really enjoyed going and watch Gus do surgeries. It made me think wound healing is really important. I thought it was quite important, but I thought it was really important when I saw the potential clinical impact. And look, Charlotte and her Scarfree Foundation funds one of the studies in my lab, the population health study. We wound funded like Charlotte. Folk like Geoff and Jason, I can do our bit by selling it. Use me and abuse me, Charlotte, when you want.
A call to arms. Prof. Gurtner, yourself?
So I think Charlotte's right that more funding is important. And I do think contextualizing scarring within the larger field of fibrosis actually is not a bad, that's kind of been our strategy. So you're kind of in the lab looking at the commonalities between different fibrotic diseases, because they all start with an injury by and large, and they all end with fibrosis. And so it's not incredibly different. And I think kind of makes it part of a much larger and more well-appreciated problem. I think from the clinician's perspective, I think, abandoning the sense of fatalism about, there's nothing we can do about this, it's hopeless, we just kind of get them to a certain point and then just kind of abandon the patient. I do think there's new things coming down the pike. There's new opportunities. I think, I think it's very important for us to not abandon the patients that are bearing the burden of scarring, because they are difficult. In the sense of they're not simple problems to solve, but I do think we're getting more and more tools in our armamentarium. And, I think there's more coming. So, I'm optimistic and bullish that eventually we will eliminate the scourge of at least cutaneous scarring, from the earth.
Fantastic. And I will give the last word to the man who put all this together and led this project, special edition, Deputy Editor Jason Wong. Your comments, please.
Yeah, I think it's been a great experience for me putting all of these articles together. And what it really highlights is that there's an appetite for surgeons and scientists to work together and to share a common language to affecting the problem of scars and the problem of wounds. I think there's tons to do, and every time we face a wound, we should be thinking, actually, what is going on here? Every single wound has a unique signature that we really should learn more about, and capturing that in some way, and presenting it to scientists to start to break down and understand with all these new techniques that are in the laboratories is something that we really should capitalize on. The advent of AI and machine learning and these types of tools means that we will have technologies in the clinical setting that will be able to translate into the scientific language a lot easier. So I'm really quite hopeful for the future in wound and scar-related research. Watch the space and see what happens.
Thank you so much for being on our podcast.